Okay, folks, just turning back to your agenda then and to our first presentation, the rising cost of living and food poverty in Ireland, and it's presented by Bertrand Maître. Bertrand is a senior research officer at the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin. He's going to discuss the recent trends in the cost of living in Ireland with a focus on food. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to thank the organizers for inviting me, this morning to give this presentation, and as well I want to thank the Central Statistic Office as well in Ireland for supplying the data on which the analysis is being based, this morning. So I just want to talk about, very briefly about, the rising cost of living and food poverty in Ireland. And just before starting, I think the picture is gone, no? Well, yesterday, so I took the train in Connolly Station in Dublin yesterday afternoon, and just before going on the platform, outside on the street, there was a lamppost with a poster attached to it, and I thought, oh, really, I have to take a picture of this poster, just to show to the people, that's really to show how there is a huge concern about, the increase in the cost of living. Okay, here we go. So this is it. Before it goes away again next time. So you can see that, really, that was just a few bucks. It goes away again. So, but very briefly, anyway. So you saw that, we have those posters and you have demonstrations everywhere here in Ireland. But again, I presume the same. I'm coming from France. We have as well, the issues are the same. People are really concerned about, the rising cost of living, and particularly as we're going to move into the winter. But so, yeah, at 2:30, next Saturday, I'm down Square in Dublin. So really, I found that, you can see that really it's about, energy costs, housing, wealth inequality. So it's really much broader than that, than the cost of living. But really, the cost of living is really one of the major concerns. So you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so yes, so just to give a bit of a background, where it's coming from, where, we have at the moment, quite a high level of inflation that we didn't have, for the last few years. So just to explain, where it is coming from, if we go back to 2021, what we had, and that's true, in Ireland, but everywhere, in the world, internationally, there was really a very strong increase in global food prices of almost 30%. And that was mostly due to some disruptions, in the agricultural sector, coming from the bad weather and, initiated, by climate change, but as well, there was some disruptions as well on the supply of food chains, during the pandemic. So that's really for the food, that explain, where it's coming from. If we're looking at as well in terms of the increase in the price of energy products as well, in 2021, things were starting to improve a little bit, in mid-pandemic and so on. There was a huge surge of demand on energy products. And of course, the supply was not able to match that demand, so that's why, the price of energy went up as well. So if we're looking at here in the Republic, so the forecast is that we were going to get an inflation rate of 7%, for the year 2022, supposed to fall to 4% in 2023. So that's, the expectations of my optimistic colleagues, at the ESRI. So we'll see if they're right or not. And when we look at, the components, that are really pushing inflation, we see that, and that's true in Ireland, but everywhere else, that's really just mostly due to the price of food and the price of energy. And we know that, energy and food are really quite, have, any changes on those products, really have huge consequences on low-income household, and they're much more affected by any change on those. And we're going to look at that, today. So if you go to the next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk, in fact, I think we can't really look at exactly the direct impact of inflation on the expenditures and the food poverty on the household. So the only way we can look at that, it's really using different data sets. So the first data set that I'm going to use to show some results this morning, it's the household budget survey. So unfortunately, we were supposed to have a survey in 2020, but with the pandemic, that has been postponed. Or I think CSO started to do that, but that has not been released yet, and that should be for next year, 2023. So the household budget survey that we have, it's 2015, 2016. So this is, a survey of private household, and it's looking at, expenditure of household across, everything. And as well, it has characteristic of households like, the tenure, the type of accommodation. We have a lot of information about the household. So this is the first survey we're going to look at. And as well, the second survey is the survey on income and living conditions, called SILC. And this is, a survey, as its name, it's saying, looking at income of household, but individual income. And it's looking at the living conditions of household and the environment in which people are living in, but as well it has a lot of information about the individuals living in the household, such as health, economic status, education, and so on. So we're going to try to see with those two surveys how we can look at the impact of the rise on food and energy on this household, and which households are much more likely to experience food poverty. So how do we measure food poverty? In 2012, I think in 2013, the Department of Social Protection, initiated some work. They were quite interested to develop a measure on food poverty, and that was using the SILC survey. This is a survey which is going to be conducted, every year. So the advantage of that survey that you can monitor poverty quite regularly every year. So in that survey, when we interview household, we ask household a lot of questions about their living conditions, if they can do this, they can do that, is that because they can't afford it, and so on. So we identified a few set of items in relation to food. And you can see here, we found 3 items that are related to food, and that really is capturing enough ability, to have some food items. So you can see the first items, it's the household is unable to afford a meal with meat or vegetarian equivalent every second day. The second items is about the inability to afford a roast of vegetable equivalent once a week. And the third item, it was asked to everybody, age 16 in the household, and we used the answer of the head of household. And we assumed that if the head of household is being deprived of this item, everybody in the household, is experiencing food deprivation on this particular item. And it's really asking to the head of household if there was one day in the last fortnight, if the head of household, had to go out with no substantial meal due to the lack of money. And it's simply the food poverty measure. It's simply the sum of those 3 items. And we consider the household to be experiencing food deprivation if at least one of these items, is being experienced in the household. Okay. So we can go maybe to the next slide, and we're going to see, what happened in terms of the trend of the price in Ireland over the last 3 years. So first, I'm reporting 2 things here. So this is, the consumer price index. So that's really the black line. And in red, we have, the percentage annual change. Okay, so as you can see, in 2020, nothing really happened, prices were quite stable. So we're comparing that, with the 2016 price. So that's the base 100. As you can see that, there's very little change. And even in red, we can see that, the inflation was quite negative, prices were falling during that period of time. So the first vertical blue bar, so it's simply the start of the pandemic, that's hit, Ireland, early February or late February 2020, sorry. And we can see that as we move in 2021, as I was mentioning earlier on, we can see that, prices are starting to go up, the CPI in black starting to rise, and as well, the percentage change, of price or inflation is changing as well, increasing. So as we arrive to the end of 2021, we can see that the inflation rate was, 6.5% in red. And in the next straight line, in 2022, so that's the invasion of Ukraine. So we can see again, as a consequence as well, or, just as a follow-up of what was going on in 2021, we can see that, prices are still, starting to go up. And at the end of July 2022, so we had an inflation rate of 9%. Okay, so price, were really starting to go up straight away, from early 2021. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? And when we decompose the consumer price index, we can see that there's a few items that are pushing inflation. And here, I'm just reporting 4 of those items, the ones that we are quite interested today. There is another item as well, but I'm not reporting here, but we think, because it's not really relevant for the purpose of today's presentation. That's really the change in the price of hotels and restaurants and so on. Because of course, here we are much more focused about, the cost of energy and the cost of food. So you can see that from a very early stage, in 2021, prices were starting to go up very sharply for energy. You can see that at the end, July 2022, compared to July 2021, price have an increase on energy products by 55%. If you're looking at for, not the whole slide appears here, I think, we're missing a few items, in fact, in the labels. So in fact, the second line, you see the 19%, that's really the increase in the price of transport. So that's really diesel, petrol for cars and so on. And at 8%, this is, the change in inflation rate for food. So that's 8% in July 22, the increase compared to what it was in July 2021. Okay, so if you can go to the next slide. So now we're going to look at the pattern of expenditures of household. And here again, we are reporting food expenditure as a percentage of the weekly expenditure. So that's the blue bar, and in red, food expenditures as a percentage of the weekly income. So here what we have households have been sorted into income deciles. So on the left side, we have household in the bottom of the income distribution, the poorest household. And on the right side of the slide, we have the richest household. So you can see that, the poorer household in the bottom income distributions, almost 20% of expenditures are being, spent on food. While if you're looking at in the richest household, it's less than 5%. So half of that compared to the poorest household. And if we're looking at, again, all along the income distribution, we see that, there's quite a very strong linear relationship, between the income position and the level of expenditures on food. If we're looking at now in red, the how much, people are spending on food compared to their weekly household income. Again, the poorest are the ones that's spending almost half of their income into food. So there's a big fall after as we go into the second decile. So it's less than 20% of their weekly income being spent into food. And again, as you go to the richest household, you see it's 7-8% only of the income that's going to be spent in food. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see exactly the same thing for the energy. So exactly the same pattern. Again, you can see that the poorest household, 10% of expenditures, are being spent on energy, compared to 3% for the richest household. And again, if we look at as well in terms of their weekly income, we see that the poorest household on the left side, are spending above 25% of their weekly income into energy, while again, it's less than 5%, 4%, 3% for the richest household. And again, we have this very strong linear relationship, in expenditure all along the income distribution. So the poorest are spending more, and those two products, energy and food, are the big bulk, of their expenditures. So if we can go maybe to the next slide, please. Well, I think all the labels have been, yeah. No, I think, it's the previous slide. I think, exactly. No, it's not that. So I think if you go to the next slide, I think, I think, we're skipping 2 slides here, or even more than that. That's the, okay. Okay, can you go? Yeah, exactly. I think that this is it. Thank you. So when you look at, the structure of expenditures of household across the income distribution, household don't have the same kind of expenditures, on food. The composition is very different if you're looking at, that's what kind of food people are buying at the bottom, or what kind of food, people are spending on the top of the income distribution. And because of that, households are going to experience different inflation rate. So as you can see here, so in blue, so this is the inflation rate experienced by household in the bottom of the income distribution. So that's in March 2022, and in red, the equivalent in June 2022. So you can see that the poorest household, they are experiencing an inflation rate of 7.5%, and it goes down as we go all along the income distributions, and the richest household are only experiencing 6% of inflation rate on food, okay? So that was in March 2022. Between that, March and June, again, price up again, went up, increased quite a lot. And again, we can see that, the poorest household are experiencing an inflation rate of 10% in June 2022, and it falls to 8% for the richest household. And again, a very uneven experience of inflation across the income distribution. So not only we see that the poorest household, are spending most of their income on food, but again, they're experiencing a much higher inflation rate than the richest household. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so that's good. So here, rather than looking at the income distribution, we're looking at, the different type of household. So we're looking at, single household, single adult household, 2 adult household, adults, with children, and lone parents, and so on. And again, we're showing again, what's the level of inflation experienced, by those households across time. And here we're just, comparing 3 points in time, June 2021 in blue, in green, December, 6 months after, and again, 6 months after in June 2022. So in early June, mid 2021, there was not that much differences, in the experience of inflation across households. You see that, it went, from 1.3% to 1.7% at the maximum. Not that much differentiation. So as we moved into the winter of 2021, we can see that, single adults, lone parents, are experiencing the highest level of inflation rates. You see that, it's 6% here on the left side of the screen. And as we go to household with children or over household with children, the experience of inflation is much lower at 5%. 6 months after, so in June 2022, we have exactly, again, the same pattern. So the household that are experiencing the highest level of inflation, it's single adults, lone parents household, at 10%, while it's 8-9%, for other household with children. Okay, completely again an uneven distribution experience of inflation across household types. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Now I'm going to start, very briefly about, food poverty. This is the trend of food poverty. So that was really household lacking one of those 3 items that I showed, just earlier on. So starting from 2004 to 2021, so food poverty, that's the blue line. And if I had shown the level of unemployment, we would have seen that from 2008, 2009 onward, you can see that the level of food poverty is increasing in blue to reach a peak around 2013. That was 13% of food poverty at that time. And as we were starting to go out of the recession, so food poverty was falling. And if I had put the level of unemployment, it would have been exactly the same thing. Okay, same pattern, with an increase and again, a fall. Here in red, we have the consumer price index, and you can see that, there's not that much changes. I mean, it's going up, but it looks like, there's no relationship, between those two. There's no associations anyway between, the change of price and food poverty. But again, that goes only up to, 2021. And again, when the CSO is doing the SIG survey in 2021, in fact, it's looking at as well the conditions, that people, income in 2020 and as well living conditions 2021. So it could be, might be a bit, too early to capture anything on that. So I just want to, with the next slide, just to show what's the relationship, between low-income household and the experience of poverty. And I'm just, picking up, two things, to show the relationship between low-income household and the experience of food poverty. So in red, you see in the dash line, in red. So this is the experience, how the proportion of household experiencing food poverty for households that are above the poverty line. So you see that it goes, from 5, just above 10% during the recession and went down again. In red, dark line, so this is the level of food poverty for households that are below the poverty line. So it's much higher. So you can see that really low-income households are experiencing a much higher level of food poverty than those that are not below the poverty line. If you're looking at as well the relationship with households that have financial difficulties making ends meet, again, the same story. So in blue dash, this is the proportion of households that don't have any great difficulty making ends meet, and very few of them are experiencing food poverty. And you see that even during the recession, in fact, there's no increase really happening at that time, in 2013 and so on. And again, but if you see that the level of food poverty for households that are experiencing great difficulty making ends meet, the level of food poverty is much higher. So there's really clearly a very strong relationship, between financial difficulties and the experience of food poverty. And that's what we might expect, maybe to see later on when we get, some data in the near future. So just want to show again, very briefly, again, the experience of food poverty by household type. That's the next slide. So we saw early on as well that in terms of expenditures, that there were some households that were spending more on food, and as well that the proportion of expenditure on food, represented a very large portion of their household income. And here we're looking at the experience of food poverty across the same kind of a household that we saw early on. And again, looking at 3 different periods of time: 2004, 2013, the peak of the recession, and 2020. So again, you can see that households that are experiencing the highest level of food poverty are single adults and lone parents. And again, that was, as we moved, into the recession, so we saw that food poverty increased during that time, and as we were starting to be in the recovery in 2020, while I think, even, well into the recovery. So the level of food poverty, has fallen. But again, it's really showing as well which households are much more likely to experience food poverty. And on the right side as well, I just put as well some figures for people with disability. And you can see that compared to households with children, for example, that the experience of food poverty is much higher for a household where you have someone with disabilities. So lone parents, single adults, people with disability are those households that are much more likely to experience food poverty with anything happening, in the economy, or, of course, with the increase in the cost of living. So I just want to go to the next slide. I just want to recapitulate a little bit, some of the findings and maybe what can be done to fight the increase in cost of living. So if we go to the next slide, please. So just we saw that, when we look at, the most vulnerable household, traditionally those low-income households and household of lone parents, household with single adults, age over 65, household where you have someone with disabilities, we found that, those households, when we look at, their level of expenditure on food, but as well how much, those expenditures, represent in terms of weekly household income, we show that how much, they are vulnerable and exposed to any change, in price of food and as well of energy. And those households as well are the same household that, in fact, as well are much more likely as well to experience food poverty. Is there anything happening in the economy? We saw that with the Great Recession, and it's quite likely as well it's going to happen as well with the rising cost of living. And again, those households, we have to face some decisions about, maybe, putting food on the table, or maybe not using energy and so on. So we don't know exactly what's going to be the behavior of those households. So that's quite difficult to know. So I just want to show very briefly here with those bullet points, some of the measures that had been taken by the government, at the beginning of 2022 to fight, the increase in the cost of living. So there was a whole set of measures, as you can see here. There was first, the implementation of an electricity credit of 200 euros, just for every household. There was as well some subsidies in the sector of public transport, just for the people, maybe people could switch from using their car and take public transport. But a wide range of schemes, as you can see, that, for example, there was a reduction in the threshold for the drug payment scheme, so that, people, didn't have to spend as much before being, all their spending in medicine and so on, was taking over. There was as well, an increase in the threshold for the working family payments, and as well, there were some measures, being taken as well in terms of, supporting families with children for public transport to go to school. So if we go to the next slide, I think next week we're going to have the budget 2023, so the 27th of September, and so there's a lot of speculations about what kind of measures the government is going to take. Just a few days ago, when I put those slides together, so there were talk that there would be a special package, of 2 billion euro just to fight the cost of living and to support household in Ireland. And just, the day I took the train, so speculations were, it was maybe, it would be maybe 3 billion. So as you can see that there's quite a lot of uncertainty about, the overall level of support that we might get maybe from the government. Something which is very important, again, we saw that with some of the sides, I think, we of course, the government will have to consider measures that are not going to, in fact, fuel, inflation. And that's why some of those measures will have to be quite well targeted. We don't want, to spread a lot of money everywhere. And at the end, it's going to push, the price again, up. And we saw as well that not everybody is experiencing, a very high level of cost on food or energy. We saw that, for example, household in the top of the income distribution, they don't have the same level of experience. Of course, the burden is not the same. So should we consider, targeted measures on the most vulnerable household, or should it be universal and comprehensive to every household? Even some households, are not really experiencing the same level of difficulty. So that's really as well some decisions that have been taken. So there is speculations as well that maybe, there will be the implementation of some energy credits, that maybe, again, to electricity providers at one stage, and maybe in a few months, maybe in the middle of the winter, again, there would be another additional, energy credits. One form of support as well would be to increase the rate of cross-social welfare payments. And again, that would be, of course, targeting, people like unemployed or people, living on disability pensions and allowances. So again, and household with a low level of income, like, the working family payment and so on. So again, but we need to think about, how it's going to be benchmarked against what, will it be on the level of inflation? Will it be on the increase of average earnings? So again, social protections, we have to determine exactly, if there is some change, there will be some changes anyway, definitely, but, how will it be benchmarked? The might option, as well in terms of, implementing tax cuts. So that could be, just, changing the income rate band, or as well, increasing personal tax credits. Again, there might be some changes as well on that. But again, you have to decide, which household, should benefit from those. Again, we going back again to those slides, or, when we saw that, the welfare households, are not, supporting the same level of burden, as ours. There will be an increase in the minimum wage, early in January. So supposed to support as well, that low-income earners. And those are kind of a list of speculations, that I can make, and that everybody is doing in the country, but we don't know exactly. I presume that would be maybe a mix of a little bit of that. We don't know to which extent. So I think, we have to wait, until mid next week to know exactly, which one of those are correct, or, that's why I put all those question marks. Okay, so thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.